So now we're going to look at our, I suppose, our third episode really, and this is really around helping the young person explore a sense of calmness and identify and build on the skills that we've already spoken about earlier on in the 3-2-1 strategies. And we're going to look at a number of activities within the workbook. And really, I suppose, there's two parts to this. We want you to build capacity for the young person in what we would call metacognitive skills. Thinking about their own thinking when they get stressed or anxious. While at the same time we have a couple of practical skills, we're going to look at some really simple gardening skills, some really simple weaving skills, and some craft skills doing tie-dyeing. So we have two activities that are much more discussive based, reflective. We've one activity that's very naturalistic, so it's using soil, it's using plants. You're going to have much more of a sensory experience with those activities. And then we have the tie-dyeing and the weaving. And again, the weaving is a bit like the cross stitch.
Yeah, totally.
You know, you can do it in a very big way, using paper, using larger objects like twigs and things from your nature walk, but you can also do it in a really detailed, fine way with thread like the embroidery thread that we were just using. And Anne's going to show using a really simple weaving block how you can do that, but you can build that up. And so for those of you that are much more creative as well as kinesthetic, you can get a lot more from the weaving activity. But the first one is really helping young people understand that activities that are stressful can both be strengthening and stressful at the same time. And depending on the context of a situation, I can find certain activities a little bit more stressful or push me into that stretch zone rather than necessarily getting overwhelmed, and to explore that a little bit further. So in the workbook we have a number of different activities, and one of the first activities, and this can be a really interesting activity and it can really spend a bit of time doing it, and it's based on Maslow's hierarchy of need. And most people have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of need, and it talks about basically 5 levels of a sense of safety and security. And the first one is that sense of very basic safety. And when I explain this to students, I think about it like being in class. So if you're at that very basic level of I barely feel safe or I'm surviving in that class, that means going into, let's say, it might be a subject that you might find more difficult. So in my case, maybe that might have been a language class. So I would have felt very nervous in that class. I wouldn't have understood a lot of what's going on around me. I found languages really difficult. I wasn't sure of what was happening or what was expected of me. So all of my emotions were very stressful. So because I was only at the bare survival level. When you get to the security level, which is the next level up, well, I'm okay in that class. I'm getting by. I have a sense of what's going on around me. I'm passing that subject, maybe I'm not failing that subject, so I'm passing. But if you think about it like swimming, you're just treading water. You're not really getting very far, but you're keeping your head and your shoulders above water, and you're okay. So it means that a lot of your emotional energy is just getting through it. But it's less likely to be anxiety inducing, whereas the survival class, you're going to be much more anxious. Whereas the security class, I'm doing okay. I'm not shining in this class, but I'm doing okay. The next level up is one of the most important levels, is belonging. And it's a really important place that you sit with when you're talking with the students and finding out, well, what classes do I belong in? And when I go into a class that I feel, and if it's in a primary classroom, it might be a phase in the day. So we're about to do art. I feel like I belong in that. I'm good at that. I'm able to do that. I know what's expected of me. So when I'm presented with those activities, I have that sense of I'm okay with this. I'm able to do it. I know how to ask for help. I feel a bit more safe in that context. And you will find that if you ask a young person, let's say if I ask them, if I have a list of subjects, and you can do this, and it's one of the activities in the workbook, is to do a Maslow's timetable. So if I take, let's say at a secondary school level, I might say, well, let's look at English. For English class, are you at survival? Are you at security? Are you at belonging? Or are you at esteem? Now, esteem is when you go into that class, I love it. It's my favourite subject. I get on really well with the teacher. I feel really secure in that subject. I look forward to that class. I can't wait. I'm biased. I have home economics next. You know, I'm really looking forward to that subject. I love that class. I would have found the same in maths. I loved going into a maths class because it was ordered and structured. Now you will find that if you ask, and you can do that up on the board, you can do it in loads of different ways, but where would you put yourself for maths? And let's say a student might say, well actually for maths I'm at security. I'm okay, I'm passing, it's fine. I don't love it, it's not my favourite class, but I'm not nervous in it, I'm not anxious in it. Where are you for English? Where are you for Irish? Where are you for history? Where are you for science? And then you explore, well, how does it feel to be in a class where you're at, let's say, the survival level? So you're only barely keeping your head above, you're getting by. Where would you think, what kind of emotions might you think that you would have, Hannah, around in that class, in your different areas?
I suppose if you're just, you're just getting by, you're probably feeling very self-conscious, I think. Like you and me are very opposite in that way. Maths was I wouldn't even say, it was my survival class, where I felt that everything I said was scrutinised, was, heightened, maybe meant that people were listening to me maybe more than they really were, and kind of feeling judged by other people and really lost in what's going on, and really the opposite of belonging, like feeling, I think, feeling such a fish out of water, like you really don't belong in this room. And that was my experience of maths. It's your experience of languages. In a primary school, you wouldn't necessarily do this as a timetable because the kids don't know their timetable. It's not shared with them by the teacher, because you wouldn't always necessarily stick to your timetable in the same way that you would in secondary school. But you could do this with colours, I think, and say, okay, what part of the day is this colour, and why did you colour it that way, and how do what does that colour mean for you, and do all of that. It is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's a much more differentiated for your middle to younger primary school years.
And did you notice, or would you have noticed, that in a class that you found maybe you were much more to survival or security level, does time move faster or slower?
Slower, definitely. Yeah, definitely slower. Yeah, because you're watching the clock, you're counting the minutes until you can be free of that horrendous feeling. And I know we had a chat about this before, where when you see that then on a, from a secondary student's point of view, when you see that on a timetable and you see I have a block of survival classes first thing on Monday morning, that explains a lot about how that young person behaves then on that during that time.
And it's also, it's the awareness that the effort, the emotional effort of having survival and security classes together in a row, one after the other, on a period of time during the day or during the week. It's very, and if you actually start to look, sometimes as year coordinators in our school, we would really start to look then at patterns of attendance and missing school. And you can really see students who are always in on a Tuesday, because actually their Tuesday begins with 3 belonging classes. Now, it's to think about, you can't always change this, but what you can do is firstly bring awareness to it and look then at, well, for a young person, how can I move them from a survival to a security place? And that can be sometimes about, that's us as teachers, that's our job.
Totally.
It's about knowing that we would have some students in my school where we would be very conscious. I remember having a conversation with 2 young people last year, and one young person in particular found 2 subjects that she was absolutely at the survival level, and the amount of anxiety the thoughts of those 2 subjects caused meant that she was having real issues with attending school. And the agreement that we made for a period of time, and we always time bound that agreement, was to say, well, we'll discuss it with your teacher, and we brought the teachers involved, the 2 teachers in question, and the agreement was, you will not be asked a question in class. You will not be called on about homework in class in any way, shape or form. But you are welcome to offer an answer if you want. But you, at no point in this 40-minute or 1 hour period will I say, Hannah, So you never have to feel, oh my God, will they ask me a question? Will I be embarrassed? Will I be put on the spot?
And I think that's an extra piece that, you know, certainly, I totally identify with that. That if you're just surviving in that class, if you're just getting by, you are not able to engage. You're not at that point. So that, you know, being called on, being hopped on, being asked about why did you do this way, or where's your homework, or even ask for your opinion on something. You're not, if you're only surviving through that class, you are not at a level at which you can engage in it.
And that's where, if the teacher knows this, the teacher can accommodate that in the class very discreetly, so that you don't get that level then, so that you know, okay, actually this is okay here now. You know, but again, if the student or, you know, a parent or this doesn't give the teacher that information, it can be quite hard to have that in the classroom.
And maybe that's what brings you to the next step, when you do have that, you know, that somebody is aware that this is a difficult class for me, and they're making an accommodation. Hey, I suddenly feel like I kind of belong here.
Exactly.
And it's extraordinary when you have these conversations with young people using Maslow as a framework to guide your conversation. When you start to look at the classes where they belong, where they have a sense of all of the emotional responses. How do you feel in a belonging class? And even if you have a whole bank of words up on the wall, or you have words written on post-it notes, pick out words to describe how you feel when you belong. You will hear words like relaxed, calm, included, part of, feeling happy, feeling energized. And that language, and then you can really explore, well, what happens in that class that makes you feel that way? What is it the teacher is doing? What are your other classmates doing? What are you yourself doing in that class? So you start to find the skills in the belonging class to bring over to the security and the survival classes. And it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to get everything where we need it to be, but the first stage in helping the young person explore this is to get a greater sense of, okay, that's why I feel that way on a Monday morning. That's why I feel that way on a Wednesday afternoon. That's where I would have known for me, certainly in secondary school, my entire week was punctuated around one double PE. It was all about going to that PE class on a Wednesday, so everything was anxiety causing until I got to it, and then after it was relief after it. And then you can become very, very focused on getting through that one piece that causes a lot of anxiety and concern for you. So how you explore this, and how you explore that conversation, how you present that visually. We have some examples of templates in the workbook, but it's a really lovely way around getting a deeper understanding for you as the facilitator or the guide in this conversation, but also for the young person to get a greater level of awareness. At second level then, you might take last year's timetable, because they won't have this year's timetable, and say, well, what did that look like? So let's colour those up. So you might put colours to each level, and then, colour in your timetable, and you suddenly go, that makes sense for me now. And again, it's building their understanding of their emotional response to the shape of the week. We can't build a timetable around that, but it might mean that when I look at that with a young person, maybe in first or second year, I might see, well, the first 3 periods are maybe security and survival. They're going to need a movement break in there. They're going to need an option to give them a little bit more support. Maybe I'm going to have SNA support in there. Maybe I'm going to give them the ability to use maybe the multisensory room for a period of time during that class. Maybe they might need to step out and stim during those periods, just to help self-regulate, just to help manage that kind of anxiety a little bit more. Does that seem like an interesting activity, do you think?
Definitely, and I think, as we said, you know, at primary school you mightn't necessarily use the words of survival, security, belonging, you know, maybe with 5th and 6th class, but not really very much younger. But I think you can absolutely use the colours, you know, and what does this colour mean to you? And again, you're not going to use the timetable necessarily, but you can just discuss different parts of the school day. And for a lot of kids, like the yard is that time where I feel like I don't belong, you know, and so that's something that I suppose is kind of a misconception about kids, that, you know, they love that time. Not everyone does. It can be an absolute jungle for some kids. You know, it's totally unstructured, it's really scary, it's totally sensory overload. If I don't have a concept of time, I don't actually know how long we are out here, or how long is left, or when I get to go in, and things move and change so quickly, and depending on what teacher is on the yard, that means the rules are different every day. You know, in general, obviously all the big rules are the same, but how things are dealt with are going to be different. And you know, when you think about it, they don't know that day to day. You know, as the teaching staff, you know who's on the yard, you know, but that's not communicated to those children, and they don't know who to expect and who to see on the yard and each day. And then it's only at the time that they get out there that they see, oh, it's Miss whoever today, you know. And maybe for some children, that might mean certain things for them, you know. So I suppose, look, just being aware of that, you know, yard, and even activities like art or PE, as you said, like the unstructured nature of them, and the way that PE, especially the way it kind of moves around. It might be in the hall one day, it might be on the basketball court the next day, it might be out in the field. That unstructured nature can be very challenging for some kids to manage as well.
And there's another activity in there as well, just if you wanted to further explore the concept of belonging, and just again to build a conversation around what does it look like, sound like, and feel like. So if I was looking in the window in a class where you felt, or in a subject you felt you really belonged, what would I see? What would it look like? What would I hear? What are the different things I would hear in that classroom? And again, you might use emoticons, so you might just have a couple of emoticons instead of using the words like survival, security, belonging, esteem. You might just have 4 or 5 emoticons that you're using again to explain that concept. But it fundamentally moves from really feeling out of your depth to feeling I'm barely holding it together, I belong, and I shine. And it's really looking at, as I move up through that, where I sit for each different subject and each.
And I suppose, like when you were mentioning break time there, yard, I mean, it would be similar perhaps in secondary as well. And if you take it, you know, in their, you know, 3 class blocks or 1 hour blocks, you know, that could go into the lunchtime as well, in fact. So they could end up having 4 periods perhaps of feeling that way. In fact, which, you know, anxiety at that point then is, you know, they're not getting that, you know, I suppose relaxation piece that other students might have for their break actually.
When you might be assuming that they've had a break when in fact they actually haven't.
And we also forget that sometimes, and it's very important, even if you're doing part of this challenge, you're looking at building in activity. Sometimes what we really need is peace and silence. And at break time, sometimes the one thing a student needs is to be left alone, to sit and either read a book, or just sit and listen to some music, or sit in silence.
To just not have anything asked of them for 20, 30 minutes.
And our natural response sometimes as adults is to want to include. And a desire to go over and send someone over to talk to them, or to go and sit and speak to them, as opposed to asking that young person, what do you need now? What is going to work for you? Do you want time out? And I think I love the As I Am stickers and badges that said, you know, I'm happy to speak, I don't want to speak, I'm happy to speak to people who know me. Actually being able to really represent and say, actually right now, I want silence. I want to be, and I'm really comfortable, and I feel really safe, and I feel like I belong when I'm just by myself. And that's okay for me. I'm being given permission to do that. And it's very important, even with the summer challenge, that you don't feel the need to fill every minute. And that's why some of these activities, like the cross stitch and things, they give a young person permission. We're going to do one of the activities we're going to do in our next section is looking at card games, and really simple 2-player card games, but also solitaire as a card game is a lovely moment to take 10 or 15 minutes to play a game, keep your mind busy, keep yourself active, but it allows you to be both active and alone simultaneously, and that maybe gives you permission for people to give you that space as well. So that's the idea there of exploring the strengths and strengthening section, but also looking at using Maslow. And the last thing we're going to talk to you here as a kind of a metacognitive skill is the life luggage worksheet. Now it's a really simple worksheet taken from a book called Draw on Your Emotions by Linda Metcalf. And it really is an interesting one because what it does is, it's a really simple representation of getting a young person to think about all of the thoughts in my head on an average day. And sometimes you can look at a Monday versus a Friday. There can be really interesting ways, and there's a sheet in the worksheet that looks about thinking of all of the responsibilities and thoughts and concerns we have. Write as many of them down as you can on the backpack. You can use symbols or images if you want. Feel free to use, if you want to just use colours. And when we're finished, we pick 5 we feel we could be changed. And a really important element of this activity is, firstly, to brainstorm all of the thoughts. Now, if you want to take it one step removed, you can say, imagine a student going into first year for the first time. What might all of the thoughts in their head be? Now, actually what the young person will answer is what's in their head. But by saying it's one step removed, it gives them permission to maybe be a little bit freer in the kind of information. So if, let's say, we were a student leaving 6th class, going in after 18 months of COVID, and a very disjointed secondary or primary, end of primary experience, moving into secondary school with us, what are the kinds of thoughts we think they might say?
Well, they'd definitely be anxious, definitely, because they want to know about the classrooms, the teachers, the subjects. It's big boys and girls, you know, the 5th and 6th years. Because like when you're 12 or 13, they're quite tall.
They're adults.
You know, they are. And they're walking around with you. You know, so they are also going to be concerned about their books. You know, and some of them, in fact, won't even leave their books in their locker. We don't have lockers now because of COVID. But, you know, that they will want to have everything with them because they're afraid that they'll forget something. So I suppose the teachers have a bit to play there as well, you know, in reassuring that, look, if you forget it, you know, are having rules around that. Their lunch, you know, we spoke about the yard there, but, you know, lunchtime in secondary school can be quite daunting as well. If you have 300 or 400, you know, in a canteen, all having their lunch at the same time, the noise level there is massive.
Yeah, it's very different to primary school where the lunchtime and the yard time is very activity based, and you know, in some schools, certainly in my experience, it can be quite structured, and sometimes the children will structure it themselves, and you know, you'll have a big group playing one game, whether it's chasing or you know, whatever else they might be playing, and that doesn't really, from my experience of secondary school, doesn't really occur as naturally or as structured even. So you know, I think that's a huge transition. And
it is, and you know, one of the things that can really help there is lots of schools, and I know we have it in our school, is a social club. So you know, for the students that would find that piece overwhelming, that they know there is this kind of place to go, quiet place, because it could be card games. You know, Warhammer would be another you know activity that they like to play. So even for them to know that those things exist in a school can actually really lessen that burden, or you know, that piece that they're bringing in with them. And for some of them as well, it can be getting on the bus for the first time. You know, if they're if they're from a rural school and they're coming into the local town, maybe they're coming in on the bus and they've never done that before because they've maybe walked to school or somebody's dropped them to school. Now they have to come in on the bus. Remembering all the equipment they have to bring, you know, if it's ingredient, PE, woodwork, whatever, art, you know, like there's a lot to remember. And I think they also hear about it, you know, especially if they've older siblings or neighbours or whatever, they will hear about secondary school and all that goes with it. And I think one of the key pieces, and all schools really do this, is the support they have there for the first years, but maybe they don't always realise the support that schools have for them to help, you know, lessen that burden.
And I think it's important to remember that as we prepare young people to transition into second level, or moving from junior school to senior school in primary, going into a different teacher in primary if they've had the same teacher for a number of years, or even for the last year, then suddenly a new teacher.
Moving to a different part of the school, like certainly where I was teaching, it was downstairs was the junior classes and upstairs was the senior classes, and oh my goodness, getting up those stairs was a huge step for a lot of kids, you know.
And I think if we add another dimension to that, and it's really important that we consider the thought process for the autistic young child going into school, that what we do at second level, if I take that for an example, we might do a series of events that are meant to be transition events. So there are events where we talk about, well, when you come into school you're going to have a tutor and you're going to have a year coordinator and you're going to have different teachers. But for example, if I have science, but twice a week I have it in a science lab and once a week I have it in a classroom, I won't necessarily transfer that learning equally to all of those situations. So it's very important that what is appropriate for most students will not be enough for the student who is coming in with an additional support need. And each individual child will need different types of support. And that's why it's really important, and as schools we do that. We make a big effort to communicate with the primary schools. We build on the knowledge that all of the work that's happened in primary, that at second level we need to build on that and speak to the teachers and know what works and speak to the young person. I know in our context, as an Educate Together school, we'd be very conscious of including the student in that. So our transition programme actually runs for months, it doesn't run for days. It starts off as quite intensive for 3 days when there's nobody else in the school except the first years, and they get ownership of the whole building. But then we have events that are every week, and then we have more targeted support for our autistic students or any other student with maybe an additional support need of some shape or form. So it's understanding with this activity that all of the things that they're worried about, it's okay to be anxious and worried about them. And then what we have to start to do is to pick the ones that they have control over. So when we think about it, we would be talking about things like the materials for class, making sure that it's okay not to forget something, and that's fine. And what do you do if? Or if you get lost, that can be a very common anxiety. If I get lost, what do I do? Well, then you ask somebody, well, let's practice a sentence. Let's write down the sentence that you would say if you get lost, and how would you ask that? And then we practice it. And the idea being, as you said earlier, Hannah, practice is what's really important. Practicing it in loads of different situations and really building up those skills and being able to transfer it. So the life luggage one, Hannah, you had a lovely example earlier on about actually getting an actual bag.
Yeah, I think because a lot of autistic children and young people are visual learners, I think, it's a great activity, but I suppose kind of talking about it may be a little bit abstract for some. So, you can make that really concrete by getting a physical bag and either, writing down on pieces of paper or maybe Jenga blocks or something like that, all the different worries, transferring them in, or maybe there's specific objects that you can attribute a certain worry to. Like you might have a dictionary, a hardback copy for this represents my worry about forgetting my books, and you might have something else representing a worry for, something else. You might have, change for forgetting my bus fare or knowing how much, that kind of thing. And then really getting them to put that bag on their back once it's full and carry it around and really see how difficult that is. It really kind of cements the idea for them and takes it out of the abstract.
Yeah, one lovely way I saw that activity done before was the facilitator had a series of boxes, different sizes, and they were just really, and then they wrote down all of the things that they were worried about, and they picked the size of a box to describe how much of a worry it was for them. So if it was a smaller worry, they were writing it on the smaller box. If it was a bigger worry, they were writing it on the bigger box. And you could really start to see their emotional response to things, so that things you might think about, well, using lockers and having my materials were smaller, but actually being picked on by older kids was actually a huge one.
Yeah, and if you hadn't got boxes, you could do that with books. You had loads of books, you wouldn't have to buy anything, you'd have books at home, or somebody else would be able to lend you books, and you could have small books and put a post-it on it for this is a small worry, and then you could have a really big dictionary or encyclopedia, this is a huge worry, and they all go in the bag then.
And I suppose another thing is, as the term progresses, there can be more concerns, particularly for secondary areas around homework. That suddenly can become an issue, or even something like using the toilets. First years won't do that because of they're not really sure of how that works, or maybe they're afraid. And so as the term progresses, there can be other issues that arise. So it needs to be, like you were saying, Billy, in your school, that it's more term-based as opposed to just an event for a couple of days. Exams can be another big thing. You know, they wouldn't be, they might have the Friday, test, the spelling test, but suddenly they have 8 or 9 subjects and they're all having the test, or you have midterm tests, or you have Christmas tests, so suddenly they're concerned about, well, what does that look like, because we haven't had that before. Do you know, so I think that would be important actually, that as the term progresses, that it's not just something that's done at the beginning, that it's something that can be carried through for them.
And I think the key message is that we're encouraging young people to have the confidence to name what they're worried about. Name their anxieties, know that there are adults in the school that they bring those concerns and worries to, and that we build their capacity for them to navigate that skill. It can't happen to them, it has to happen with them, and that's really, really important. So there's some other activities. Again, they're just some guides in the workbook, but just to allow you to maybe explore and go a little bit further with that. So now we're going to move into another couple of practical skills. So we're going to look at some tie-dyeing, one of my favourite activities to do. Very home economics-y thing to do, and we're going to look at it in 2 different ways. So myself and Anna are going to explore that with Hannah. And then we're going to look at a really simple weaving block and some weaving skills, and we're going to look at some gardening skills. We're going to make a couple of really, really simple window boxes and just show you how to do that. And that'll kind of, and again, all of these are about building into multiple intelligences, different kind of skills and interests and activities, and you can adapt them and do them in a number of different ways.